Hey guys. So I just kind of wanted to share with you something that God has laid on my heart. This last couple of weeks, I've just kind of been in a rut, just going through some things, facing some decisions. There's been times where over the last couple of weeks, I've really felt alone, and just really needed to call on God. And so as I've faced just kind of the things that I have been going through, um, I've, to be honest with you and be completely transparent, I felt like God's been distant, like He's not been there. I've heard His voice and He spoke clearly to me, but I felt like when it's come to really needing Him, I couldn't help but ask God, "Where are you?" In the midst of my situation, in the midst of my circumstance, Your Word says that You're not going to leave me. But right now, if I'm honest with You and I'm transparent with You, God, where are You? Because I don't see You, I don't feel You. Yeah, you choose to speak to me every now and then, but God, I need answers and I need communication, and right now I just can't. I don't hear it. Okay, and so this is kind of where I've been in my mentality, and I've been seeking out just advice and counsel from people who are very close to me, people who know my heart, but who also know the heart of the Father. And there's one of my friends, Icy. She's phenomenal. For those of you that know her, we all love her. She's just awesome. But she's someone that I can always count on and really go to for advice and counsel, and just be transparent with when it comes to God and just even everything in my personal life. And so I've kind of just opened up to her, let her know some of the things that I was going through, and she's been giving me godly counsel, godly advice. And so, but this morning I was at church, and she happened to go with me, but we heard a message about hearing the voice of God, and that's not something I've ever really dealt with. I've never really questioned, how do I know that God's speaking to me? How can I hear the voice of God? I've just been fortunate enough to be in communion with the Father and have finally tuned into His voice until recently. And so this message kind of hit at a perfect time. I've been facing some obstacles, um, facing some challenges, things that the enemy's just throwing at me, and some big decisions that I have to make and stuff. And so just been questioning God, and as I'm in the midst of this, like I said, I've had to ask God, "Where are you? Like, you speak to me, you hear, I hear you, but where are you now?" And so, during prayer, we heard about just the Father and Him wanting to be in relation and be our friend, and talk with us openly and have that open line of communication. And during prayer, I was challenged to really just seek out God. What are you wanting to speak to me as your friend, as your son? What is it that you're wanting to tell me? And so I heard God say, and it was straight conviction, but He says, you seek the counsel of many. You seek the advice from others and from the many people that are around you. Yet I, who is perfect in knowledge and who knows all things, who has a plan for you and a purpose for you and a will for your life, you don't listen to, you don't turn to. Yeah, I've appointed people in your life and I've given you people that you can go to and seek counsel, but it was never intended to be before me. It was never intended to be above me. Okay, and I don't know who can share that experience with me, but I'm speaking to someone because I'm right there. And God says, you were never intended to have a relationship or communion with anyone above and before me, because I created you for that, to have that open relationship, that open communication with me, and yet you drown it out with the voices of those around you. And I felt God saying, if you would just tune in, if you would seek opportunity and you would seek me and you would truly listen for my voice, I'll guide you. I'll give you knowledge. I'll give you understanding. But you have to silence the voices around you and listen to me. And with straight conviction. And so I'm just thankful for a God who loves me enough to be honest with me, to be transparent, and just tell me what I need to hear, even when I don't need to hear it. And let me tell you, God has been speaking to me the last week and has told me things that I have completely rejected. I don't want to hear that, God. That's not for me. I don't want to hear it. I know better. And this morning He says, but you don't. But you don't. I created you and I've given you such knowledge and understanding. But you do not know better. You do not see all things. His ways are greater than mine. His sights are greater than mine. And He reminded me of that this morning. So I've been in that mentality this morning. And tonight I felt God just urging me to get in His presence and worship. And so I turned on this song by Kim Walker-Smith, which actually accompanies this message. And it's called Just One Touch. If you haven't heard it, listen to it. It'll wreck you. Oh, I love it. But God spoke to me through this song, and I turned all the lights off, and I just began to worship. And He reminded me of a story in the Bible, and it's a story that I'm sure you've heard. I'm sure you've even heard it in this very same way that I'm about to tell it to you, because it's a story I've heard many, many times. And yet, even though I've heard it so many times, God chose tonight to remind me of the story of what He wants to do and what He's speaking. And He totally spoke to me through this passage tonight. And so it's something that I want to share with you guys. It is, the title of this message, just like the song, is Just One Touch. Okay, and it is the parable of a woman who fought for just one touch. Okay, now this particular parable is told in Matthew 9, Mark 5, and Luke chapter 8. But the two versions that I really want to focus on is Mark chapter 5 and Luke chapter 8. So let me read from you in Mark chapter 5. Okay, starting in verse 25. Before I read, let me just give you a backstory. There's a daughter who is dead. And her family goes to Jesus and they ask her to come heal her. So Jesus makes his way, and that's where he's heading. And starting in verse 25. Now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years, and had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, "If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well." Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing himself that power had gone out from him, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to him, "You see the multitude thronging you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. Verse 34, and he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." Okay, let's also look at that in Luke chapter 8, starting in verse 43. You'll notice that it's very similar. There is some slight wording difference, and that's really why I've chosen to read from that one, just because I love the way that it also words it. So let me get there. All right. Luke chapter 8, starting in verse 43. It says, "Now a woman having a flow of blood for 12 years, who had spent all her livelihood on physicians and could not be healed by any, came from behind him and touched the border of his garment, and immediately her flow of blood stopped. And Jesus said, 'Who touched me?' When all denied it, Peter and those with him said, 'Master, the multitudes throng and press you, and you say, Who touched me?' But Jesus said, 'Somebody touched me, for I perceived power going out from me.' Now when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling, and falling down before him, she declared to him in the presence of all the people the reason she had touched him, and now she had been healed immediately. And he said to her, 'Daughter, be of good cheer. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace.'" So I'm reminded of this story, and I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure it's something that you've heard. I'm sure it's something you've heard before. But it's something so powerful. You know, I think about this woman who had been bleeding for 12 years, this woman who had a condition. And first, let me talk about the condition, because I guarantee you have a condition. And it's not always something bad, but sometimes it can be an obstacle or something that holds us back from God. Or sometimes it's something that has been in our life, placed in our life to push us towards Him. But sometimes when we don't look at it like that, then it becomes a negative thing and it holds us back. So sometimes I want you to think about that in your own life. What is it that God has placed in your life that is meant to push you forward, push you to Him, but you're instead allowing it to push you back, to push you away? Okay, that applies to someone. I don't know who. Very well may be you. But think about the condition. I want you to think about the men and the women of the Bible who had a condition. And I want you to think about these people who were imperfect. These people who had a condition, whether it was a physical condition or a mental condition. So you think about this woman who was bleeding for 12 years. Think about those who were lame, those who had leprosy, those who were dead. Lazarus was dead. Think about Moses who couldn't speak. And yet, would they be the same if it wasn't for their condition? Would their stories, their transformation speak directly to the heart of us, of God's people, if they hadn't had that condition? Perhaps they wouldn't. So when we have a condition, when there are shortcomings or there's failures or there's mess ups or we're in a messy situation, know that you're not alone, that the people of God's word and the people that God has created have this and share this in common. And it's a testimony if you can push through it. If you can get through it and understand that it's meant to push you forward, it becomes a testimony. Okay, so think about this woman who was bleeding for 12 years. And I can't help but think about the fear that she lived in. So something kind of funny is that the Bible doesn't ever say where she was bleeding out of. Not that I care to know by any means. I'll take it for what it is. She was bleeding for 12 years. I don't need to know where or why. She was bleeding for 12 years. But I think about the fear that she had. When I was in high school, I remember one time I had a migraine and I was just in so much pain. And so I had taken an Excedrin migraine and just one little tiny tab, it's like real tiny. And that sucker did damage to me. I remember, if you don't know anything about it, there's aspirin in it. And aspirin is a blood thinner. And so 45 minutes after taking this pill, I start to bleed out of my nose. And I bled. And I bled. And I bled. And I thought I was dying. And I thought I was dying. And if you know anything about the body, as the blood flows, it attempts to thicken as well to stop the bleeding. And so I remember that, it's coming out of my nose, just pouring, but also even out of my throat. So I'm coughing up chunks of blood. It was gross. And I remember telling my mom, you've got to take me to the hospital. Mom, you've got to take me to the hospital. I am dying. This is my way out. Excedrin migraine is going to be the death of me. I'm done. I'm ready to go home. Let me get my life right. Take me to the hospital so I can die. And it's just so dramatic. But even being dramatic as it was, the fear was genuine. I really was scared. I was like, Mom, there's no way that this blood can be normal. So I think about this situation, as funny as it may be, and how I bled for only 2 hours and was terrified. There was a woman in the Bible who bled for 12 years, 365 days a year for 12 consecutive years. This woman bled, and I can't help but think about the fear that she had. Can't help but think about the fear that maybe you're living with, or the condition of your heart, or the condition of your body that you're in, and the fear and in the shame that you live with. Okay, and I want you to know that God's called you and created you for something so much more than stupid fear. And that's what I love about this story, is that she caught the mindset that if I can just get one touch, if I can just touch the cloak, the garment of the Holy One, my life could be forever changed. And this woman began to walk by faith. She starved her fear. She quenched her fear with her faith. Okay, and I can't help but think about this woman, and that's me. Broken, in sin, in shame, in hurt. And yet, I allow that to be my crutch, my reason to not pursue Jesus. But this woman, in the midst of her fear and in the midst of her condition, hears of the good news. She catches a glimpse of the good news, and she knows this Jesus, this Holy One, is coming, and he has the power to heal and to break chains and to do a new thing and to transform. And I can only imagine the excitement. In the midst of her fear, I can imagine the excitement that she carries with her. She lunges towards this Jesus. Okay, now I want you to think about a time you've been in an elevator or you've been in a hallway and there's a lot of people and you're like packed in like sardines and you've got to just like move an inch at a time and you can't really go anywhere, and you're not going anywhere quickly because you're bombarded by people. And that's the situation. That's where Jesus is at. He's surrounded by a multitude of people. The Bible says that it was multitudes of people, okay? And so think about this woman and how Jesus is surrounded by a crowd. And then I think about while everybody is moving forward like sardines, this woman is just shrugging and she's pushing people and she's fighting her way through. And I imagine, she turns and she's throwing elbows, out the way. I'm getting to Jesus, but I just imagine that she fought her way through the crowd. And that's my first point, is sometimes you've got to fight through the crowd, fight through the noise, fight through the shame, fight through the sin. because there's a Holy One that wants to be with you, the one who can change your life. There is a Holy One that is passionately in pursuit of you, and you will never experience the Holy One. You'll never experience the greatness and the goodness and the healing and the forgiveness of the Father if you won't fight. Fight through the crowd. Fight through your circumstance. Fight through your situation, because there is good news, and He's right in front of you. And if that doesn't excite you, then I don't know what will. Okay, but fight. That's the first one. Fight through. Fight through the crowd. This woman fought through the crowd. And I want you to notice, let's look at in Luke chapter 8. It says that she was bleeding, and that as she touched Him, the bleeding stopped. It dried up. It might actually have been in Mark, but it says the blood dried up. So she's fighting this crowd as she's bleeding. Do you see that just because she was fighting, the situation didn't stop? The condition didn't stop? Okay, so when you start to fight through your condition, don't think that just because you've put on the armor of God and you're fighting through, that all trouble will subside, because that's not what happens. You've got to fight through it to get to the other side of it, to get that victory. Okay, and that's what this woman did. And as she's bleeding, I imagine she's fighting off the crowd. And can you imagine if the crowd got so thick? I can only imagine that she begins to fall. She walks on this dirt, rocky road. She falls. And as she falls, she barely touches the corner of His cloak, the corner of the garment of the Holy One who has power to heal her. Too often, we think that we get in this mindset that, God is a God of all people. He hears the cries of His people, of everyone, and He hears the prayers. And in this woman, I can imagine that her fear and her doubt would tell her, I'm just a bleeding woman who is no good. I have had this condition for 12 years. Who am I? Who am I to come to this man that could heal me? Okay, and so often we get stuck in that mindset that who am I? God can't hear me. Why? Why would God do a work in and through me? I'm me. I'm full of sin. I'm full of shame. And so many times we let this hold us back from the goodness of God and all that God has for us. But I want to challenge you to just throw off those lies. Stop listening. That's from the enemy. God's got so much better for you. So just stop. Stop listening to the lies. They're not meant for you, but start listening to His voice. I think about this woman, and she fought through the crowd, but she also fought through the lies. That's my point number 2. Fight through the lies. Okay, her condition would tell her, there's nothing I can do. Her doctors, her physicians that she had seen, sorry, ma'am, nothing we can do for you. Oh, sorry, you're stuck with this. Oh, we've tried this medicine. Oh, I'm sorry, man. Unfortunately, man, this is you. This is your life. Sorry about you. Okay, but there was a hope in her. And I want you to know that there's a hope today. And just as this woman had the hope that if I can just get one touch of His garment, if I can just touch the Holy One, my life could be forever changed and transformed. My blood will dry and I can be a new woman. She had that hope. And today I want to challenge you. There is hope. That He is our hope. That if you will just get in relationship with the One, if you'll just reach for His garment, there is a power and a healing and a forgiveness and a love and a grace that wants to pursue you and will pick you up and turn your life around. You've got to fight through, and you've got to hold on to the hope. And imagine as this woman falls to the ground, that breath of, maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. And imagine as she falls and Jesus takes another step, she just feels the garment slip through her hand. In this situation, sometimes that's where we get, where, you know what, I touched the garment of Jesus, you know what, I gave it my all and I fell short. God, where were you? God, you didn't hear, you weren't there for me, you didn't speak to me. And all the while, He's like, I'm right here. I'm right here. Sometimes we feel that garment slip and we become filled with doubt. Well, maybe this really is who I'm meant to be. Maybe I'm meant to bleed for 12 years. Maybe I'm meant to live in shame, regret, sin. Maybe that's just my life. But in the midst of this situation, as this woman lies on the ground, desperate, desperate for change, Jesus says, "Who touched me?" Now, there was a heart and a spirit of desperation in this woman. And if you don't have a heart and a spirit of desperation, then you've got to find that, because until you get to that place, you will not move forward. You've got to get desperate for the Lord. Okay, and that's what this woman did. She said she fell on her face, and it says in Luke 47, now that the woman that saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling, falling down before him. Okay, and she declared to him in the presence of all the people the reason she had touched him. Okay, she fell at his feet and said, "Jesus, I know I'm unworthy. I know that I'm full of sin. I know that I have a condition. But Jesus, this is why I touched you. Because I know that there's a hope and a love and a healing that has my name on it. And I know the healer, and I fall at your feet asking that you would heal my situation." You know, and in the midst of this situation, before Jesus acknowledges her, he says, "Who touched me?" Do you think Jesus didn't really know who touched him? You know, he's being touched by everyone. But do you really believe he didn't know who had touched him? Maybe he didn't. Maybe Jesus didn't. I would like to think that Jesus did. Okay, and if Jesus knew, then he was calling on her faith. You've gotten this close, but will you call upon me? In the midst of all of the situation, sure, no eyes were on you as you're fighting off this crowd because they're on me. And when eyes aren't on you, you're sure it's easy to call on my name. It's easy to call on me and to touch my garment. But when the tension becomes on you, when I stop you in your tracks and I call upon your name in the midst of all people and all eyes are on you, do you take that same stand, that same boldness and eagerness to call on my name? That's good. And Jesus says, he calls on her faith and he says, "Who touched me?" Now, I notice the people with him, and it's always Peter, you know. Jesus, you're surrounded by a crowd. Everybody's touching you and pushing you up against you. Everybody wants a touch of you, Jesus. What do you mean, who touched you? Everybody touched you. I touched you. The 12 touched you. We've all touched you, Jesus. And he says, no. There was someone who believed, someone who touched my garment because I felt a release of my power. My power has been released upon her. Where is she? Where is this woman? And she falls at his feet, laying it all out there. Says, "Jesus, I come to you for just one touch. Just one touch, Jesus. I just need one touch." And you know what I love? This woman, in the midst of her condition, in the midst of her situation, what does he call her? Daughter. He calls her daughter. I want you to know, in the midst of your situation, in the midst of your circumstances, he still calls you worthy. He still calls you his daughter, his son, his beloved, and he loves you like never before. He loves you just as much as he did when he created you, as he does now. He knew you were going to mess up. He knew you were going to be flawed. And he came with the plan to get your heart back, to win you back, to make you whole, to make you holy. And he calls you his own, his son, his daughter, his beloved. Jesus tells her, despite your circumstance, your faith has healed you. Get up. Be in good cheer. And go in peace. Jesus calls peace upon her. He calls cheer and joy and healing upon her. And I can't help but wonder if we would get desperate like this woman. If we would catch the mindset that it just takes just one touch. And if we would become in a state of desperation and we would call out, "I just want my one touch. Just one touch. If I can only touch an inch of the garment of Jesus, my life would be forever changed." If we could get on that mindset, perhaps life would be different. So that's really what I have for you. But I want you to put yourself in the position of this woman. What is your situation, your condition? And are you allowing it to serve as a disability, to hinder you from all that God has for you? What are you allowing? What lies are you believing? What's keeping you there? If there is a holy one, a God who calls you his own, who loves you and wants to give you his power and his healing and his love and his grace, what's holding you back? I can't help but wonder, will you get desperate before the Father? Will you hold on to the hope of Christ Jesus, that there is a hope, that there is a love and a grace, that though you're undeserving, wants you, that there is a love and a God who says that, you know what, you are mine. You're flawed, you're messed up, you've messed up big time, you've blown it, but I love you all the same, as if you were perfect and spotless. Why? Because I sent my son to the cross to die for you, to wipe away your sin, to wipe away your shame, to wipe away every blemish, to make you spotless and perfect and whole. And that God who healed that bleeding woman, who wiped away and forever changed her circumstances and her situation, wants to do the same. But I ask again, will you be desperate before the Lord? Will you fight for just one touch?